Fernando Mendoza might be walking into a situation no rookie quarterback is mentally prepared for. He has an entire franchise depending on him, critics waiting for him to fail, and decades of Raiders history working against him. Psychologically, that combination could break him. Before his career even gets going, let me break it down. Fernando Mendoza's name got called first, not second, not third. First overall. The Raiders selected the Indiana quarterback #1 overall in the 2026 NFL Draft, marking the arrival of the Fernando Mendoza era in Las Vegas. He wasn't even in the building when it happened. The Heisman Trophy winner, who was not in attendance at the draft, had been expected to be the top selection for months after he led the Hoosiers to the College Football Playoff National Championship in a 16-0 season. On paper, this looks like a fairy tale. A kid who wasn't even a big-name recruit becomes the most decorated player in college football, then gets handed the keys to an NFL franchise. As the very first pick in the entire draft, Mendoza is only the fourth quarterback since 1967 to win the Heisman Trophy, a national championship, and be selected #1 overall, joining only Joe Burrow, Jameis Winston, and Cam Newton. That's the company he's supposed to be keeping. But here's where it gets complicated fast, because the team that just bet everything on him has a track record with the #1 pick that should make every Raiders fan's stomach turn. Famously, the Raiders spent their only first overall pick in franchise history on Jamarcus Russell in 2007, who's regarded as one of the biggest NFL draft busts of all time. Russell wasn't just a disappointment. He became the cautionary tale every draft analyst reaches for when they want to describe a career going up in smoke. And it's not ancient history to the people running the team right now. Raiders owner Mark Davis said it himself before this draft even happened. He knows exactly what's riding on this pick, and he knows exactly how it went wrong the last time. Davis is aware that this position brings a lot of pressure, especially considering the team's history with the #1 pick, saying having the first pick is exciting because the team controls the decision, but we've had that position before and it didn't work out. That's the owner talking about the guy he just picked in the same breath as the guy who became a punchline. Now layer on the doubters, because Mendoza isn't walking into this job with a clean slate of praise. Just days after he got picked, a rival coach who competed against him at Cal went to ESPN with concerns that cut right to the core of what makes an NFL quarterback. An anonymous ACC coach told ESPN that he didn't believe Mendoza had the NFL traits, telling the outlet Mendoza is a good decision maker, but I don't think he's got the NFL traits. Another coach put it even more bluntly, according to Yahoo Sports, saying flatly that what Mendoza does well in college simply isn't working in the NFL. That's one voice. Here's a second. Long before the draft, when Mendoza's name started climbing mock boards, college football's online army turned on him too, after he won the Heisman. The backlash arrived almost instantly. Worst Heisman winner ever, one commenter declared, offering no further explanation for the harsh assessment of a quarterback who led his team to unprecedented success. And a second critic echoed the sentiment with slightly different phrasing. A third voice went after the foundation of his whole resume, targeting the level of competition he beat to get there. The most pointed criticism attacked Indiana's strength of schedule, with one fan posting that a player on a weak team like Indiana winning the award meant the trophy means nothing now. So that's 3 separate fronts of doubt before he's even thrown a professional pass. A coach who played against him questioning his tools, a league insider saying his style won't survive contact with the NFL, and a wave of fans insisting he never deserved the credit in the first place. Add in a franchise quarterback graveyard with Jamarcus Russell's name still hanging over it, like a warning sign, and you start to see the shape of the problem. This is the story of Fernando Mendoza walking into a situation psychologically loaded against him from every direction. The history of the team that drafted him, the specific skepticism about his game, the noise questioning whether he even belongs at the top of this class, and the personal weight he's carried since long before any of this started. To understand why the deck is stacked the way it is, you have to go back before the Heisman, before the undefeated season, before Indiana even knew his name. Here's the thing about Fernando Mendoza's story. It starts with rejection, not hype. He wasn't some 5-star phenom that programs were lining up outside his door for. The former 3-star recruit appeared in 20 games with the Golden Bears, completing 66.5% of pass attempts for 4,712 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 16 interceptions. That's the Cal resume. Solid. Not spectacular. Not the resume of a future #1 pick. He grew up in Miami, born in Boston, and by his own account, he wasn't dreaming about trophies. Mendoza said he saw a list of potential Heisman candidates before the season began, and his name wasn't on it. And things changed only after the Hoosiers thumped Illinois 63-10 in late September. He didn't even think he belonged in the conversation. Friends had to send him the list. At Cal, he did the job without the spotlight. Mendoza took over as Cal's starting quarterback midway through his redshirt freshman season in 2023 and maintained the job through the 2024 campaign, helping Cal reach consecutive 6-win seasons and bowl appearances before departing for the transfer portal. 6 wins a year, bowl games, not championships. When he entered the portal, he wasn't the headline name either. As a transfer, Mendoza was ranked the number 4 quarterback and number 22 overall transfer. 4th best quarterback in the portal. Not first, not even close. Programs with actual championship pedigree wanted him anyway. He chose Indiana over heavy pursuits from Miami, Florida, Georgia, and other Power 4 schools. Think about that decision for a second. Georgia had just won national titles. Miami was home. He picked Indiana, a program that hadn't sniffed national relevance in generations. That decision is where the psychology really starts to matter, because everything that happened next happened fast, and it happened in a pressure cooker nobody expected. Coach Curt Cignetti built an offense around him, and by September, a team that was irrelevant a year earlier was blowing teams out. By December, he had a nickname, Heisman Mendoza, and the pressure of that nickname was real. According to Mendoza himself, who told reporters he felt it building game by game. Mendoza acknowledged that he feels the pressure, but said he's also privileged to be in the position he finds himself in. Then came the family layer, the part of this story that separates Mendoza from almost every other Heisman winner in recent memory. His mother, Elsa, has spent nearly 2 decades fighting a disease that never lets up. After receiving the award, he stood in front of the microphone and told the world how much his mom, Elsa, who is wheelchair-bound from her 18-year battle with MS, meant to him. 18 years, longer than most of his teammates have been alive. He didn't hide it. He built his platform around it. Inspired by his mother's MS battle, he helped launch fundraisers that have raised more than $150,000 for multiple sclerosis research and support services. On the biggest stage of his life, with the Heisman Trophy in his hands, he turned the microphone over to her story instead of his own stats. "Mommy, this is your trophy as much as it is mine," Mendoza said through tears, while dedicating the honor to Elsa, telling her she's always been his biggest fan. She wrote back to him publicly too, days before the ceremony, laying out just how much strength it took to get to that stage. Elsa also discussed the difficulty she had in telling her children about her multiple sclerosis, crediting Fernando with easing the emotional and mental toll of the disorder. This isn't a normal support system carrying a young quarterback through the most stressful year of his life. It's a family managing a chronic illness in public, on a national stage, while their son becomes the most scrutinized amateur athlete in the country. That's the emotional backdrop nobody talks about when they debate his arm strength or his pocket movement. A 3-star kid who got told no by nearly everyone, who picked the longest shot on his list of options, who built a Heisman case nobody saw coming, all while carrying his mother's illness as his stated motivation. In every interview he gave, that's not a small thing to be walking into a locker room with. It's a lot of internal weight before a single NFL snap gets played. And it sets up exactly why the specific criticisms of his game hit different than they would for anybody else. So now we get into the part that should worry Raiders fans the most. Not the resume, not the family story, but the actual football. Because separate from the noise about whether he deserved the Heisman, there's a very specific, very technical case being built against him by people whose job it is to evaluate quarterbacks for a living. Start with the numbers people love to point to. On the surface, they're outstanding. Mendoza finished the 2025 campaign by throwing for 3,535 yards and 41 touchdowns, en route to winning the Heisman Trophy and leading the Hoosiers to a perfect 16-0 record, with a dramatic win over Miami in the College Football Playoff National Championship. 41 touchdowns, 6 interceptions across the whole year, numbers that jump off a page. But dig into how NFL scouts actually talk about him, and a different picture starts forming. The ACC coach who questioned his traits wasn't alone, and the specifics matter here. Another coach, speaking to Yahoo Sports, zeroed in on something more precise than just, "he's not good enough." He pointed at exactly which part of Mendoza's game he thinks won't translate. One college football coach raised concerns about whether his skill set will translate to the NFL, saying he's the kind of half-finished praise that always comes right before the real criticism lands. NFL.com's own draft breakdown, while largely positive, still had to grapple with the athletic profile question directly. Mendoza also might not be considered an elite athlete, but for a well-built quarterback, he moves well in the pocket, can scramble out of trouble, and even has utility as a designed runner. Read between the lines there. Might not be considered an elite athlete is scout language for a guy who's going to have to win, almost entirely with his mind and his arm, because his legs aren't bailing him out against NFL pass rushers, the way they sometimes could in college. And that pocket movement question isn't hypothetical. It showed up on tape repeatedly during his final college season. One breakdown of his game against Penn State put it plainly. Mendoza is great at staying calm and throwing under pressure, but he can be a little too fearless and doesn't have a good feel for when the pressure is coming in the pocket. That's a real problem in the NFL, where pass rushers are faster, more disguised, and far less forgiving of a quarterback who doesn't sense them coming until it's too late. Even his signature performance, the national title game, showed cracks that get glossed over in the highlight reels. He didn't dominate that game through the air. In the title game against Miami, Mendoza completed 16 of 27 attempts for 186 yards. 59% completion, under 200 yards in the biggest game of his life. He got there on a legendary fourth down touchdown run, not through the clean, dominant passing performance his Heisman resume promised. Mendoza was battered around in the national title game against Miami, taking 3 sacks and several more hits, but he impressed with his toughness and fourth-quarter execution, with several big conversions in the capstone play of his career. A 12-yard QB draw on 4th down for a touchdown. Battered around, 3 sacks. That's the same quarterback that some scouts are now saying might not have the NFL traits to hold up behind an NFL offensive line, which by any measure is going to hit harder and disguise pressure better than anything Indiana's Big Ten schedule threw at him. Even people defending him have to acknowledge the debate exists. One draft analyst pushing back against the criticism still had to frame it as a defense, which tells you the attacks are loud enough to require a rebuttal in the first place. From start to finish, Mendoza authored one of the most impactful individual seasons college football has seen in recent years, with what separated him being not just production, but control of the offense, the moment, and the outcome of games. Notice the wording control, not arm talent, not elite athleticism. Even his biggest supporters are selling him on decision-making and command, the same soft skills that translate least reliably against NFL speed. So now stack it up. A rival coach questioning his traits, a second coach saying flatly his style won't work at the next level, scouting reports flagging his lack of elite pocket feel for pressure, a national title performance that leaned on legs, not arm. None of that erases the trophies, but none of the trophies erase those flags either, and he's about to carry all of it into a building with its own separate brutal history of chewing quarterbacks up. Here's where the story turns from "is he good enough?" into something much bigger than one player. Because even if Fernando Mendoza were the cleanest, most complete quarterback prospect in a decade, he'd still be walking into a franchise that has never, not once in 6.5 decades, figured out how to develop a quarterback taken in the first round. Let that sink in for a second. The Raiders have never been able to get it right when drafting quarterbacks in the first round, and they have a spotty record at best at taking a quarterback in any other round. Not a bad stretch, not a rough decade. The entire history of the franchise. The numbers back it up in a way that should scare anyone excited about Mendoza mania. Of the 44 quarterbacks the club has drafted since 1959, only Kenny Stabler and Mark Wilson have winning records as prolonged starters with the club. 2 names out of 44. That's not a development problem that gets solved by one good rookie season. That's a systemic pattern going back to the Kennedy administration. And the name that hangs over all of it, the one every single article about Mendoza's selection can't help but mention, is Jamarcus Russell. He came into the league as a strong-armed LSU product before it became immediately apparent he couldn't play, and Russell's weight ballooned as the stories of his lack of preparation became legendary, starting only 25 games over 3 seasons before being released in what many consider the biggest bust in history. That's not just a bad draft pick. That's the cautionary tale the entire league uses as shorthand for a career going wrong in every possible direction at once. The financial and emotional wreckage of that pick still echoes. The 2007 #1 overall pick signed a $61 million contract, with $32 million guaranteed, making him the biggest draft bust in Raiders and NFL history. Tens of millions spent, and the on-field return was almost nothing. Worse, Russell's collapse happened publicly, painfully, with his personal life falling apart, in front of cameras at the same time his career did. His father figure passed away in the summer of 2009, leaving Russell all alone, and he then turned to codeine syrup, causing him to balloon up to 300 pounds. By the spring of 2010, before being released with a career record of 7-18, that's not just a scouting failure. That's what happens when a franchise's structure, its pressure, and a young quarterback's own vulnerabilities all collide at once with nobody there to catch him. And it's exactly the kind of collision that shows up when a franchise piles pressure onto one man without the infrastructure to support him. Even Mark Davis knows the ghost is still in the room. He said as much himself when reporters asked him directly about picking another quarterback at the very top of the draft. The Raiders find themselves with the #1 pick again, this time looking at Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza, with Mendoza the favorite after an impressive college career. The favorite. The guy the whole league expected them to take in the exact same draft slot, where the franchise's most infamous failure happened. It's not just Russell either. The team's recent first-round history outside of quarterback hasn't inspired much confidence in the front office's evaluation process as a whole. More recently, selections like Alex Leatherwood, Damon Arnett, Henry Ruggs III, Clelin Ferrell, and Jonathan Abram have all been ill-fated. So this isn't a franchise with one bad pick in its past that it's since corrected. It's a franchise with a pattern, stretching from the Nixon era through the last few drafts, of taking talented players and failing to turn them into anything close to their ceiling. That's the building Mendoza is walking into. There is some reason for optimism baked into the setup. The front office didn't just hand him the job and walk away. He will be tasked with returning the franchise back to glory under head coach Clint Kubiak and veteran quarterback Kirk Cousins, who is set to serve as Mendoza's mentor. A veteran bridge quarterback in the room, a coach with offensive pedigree calling plays. On paper, that's more support than Russell ever got. But support on paper doesn't erase 6.5 decades of pattern. It doesn't erase the 2 names out of 44. It doesn't erase the fact that the last man asked to be the singular savior, at the very top of this draft board, ended up broke of confidence, ballooning in weight, and out of the league within 3 years. Mendoza isn't just being handed a roster spot. He's being handed a haunted house and told to make it a home, all while 3 of the loudest voices in the sport have already told the world, in public, that they don't think he has what it takes to survive there. So here's where all of it comes together. The scouting doubts, the franchise's ghosts, the noise from fans who think he never deserved any of this in the first place. None of those threads exist in isolation. They stack, and the stacking is the whole point. Think about what's actually sitting on Mendoza's shoulders walking into his rookie training camp. A rival coach has already gone on record questioning whether his traits translate. A second coach has already said, in print, that what worked for him in college simply doesn't work at this level. Scouting reports have already flagged his feel for pressure in the pocket as a real weakness, not a nitpick. And the online reaction to his Heisman win showed a chunk of the fan base is already primed to call any rookie struggle a confirmation that he never belonged in this conversation to begin with. Now put him in a building where the last man handed this exact assignment. First overall pick, quarterback of the future, get it right or watch the whole city sour on the pick. Flamed out so completely that his name is still the go-to punchline nearly 2 decades later. Owner Mark Davis brought that history up himself, unprompted, when talking about this very selection. And underneath all of that professional pressure sits something no scouting report measures. A mother who spent 18 years fighting a disease that doesn't go into remission just because her son has a big rookie season coming up. A family that manages that fight in public, on podcasts, in Players Tribune letters, at the same time their son is trying to learn an NFL playbook under a new coaching staff in a new city. Mendoza has said himself that thoughts of his mother's daily fight are what push him through hard workouts and hard days. That's a powerful source of motivation. It's also a weight that doesn't lift, just because the calendar turns to his rookie year. To his credit, The people around him insist he's built differently than most 22-year-olds facing this kind of scrutiny. His own coach at Indiana talked about him constantly hunting for the mistakes, in games he'd already won, refusing to sit still with success. Though the scoreboard may not show it, he said he had a lot to improve upon, pointing to footwork mistakes here, a missed check there, one inaccurate pass he'd like to have back. That's not the profile of a guy who cracks the first time a pass rush confuses him. The Raiders' own general manager, standing at the podium the night he was drafted, described him less like a physical specimen and more like a culture fit. Someone raised right, someone who makes the mission about the team rather than himself. General manager John Spytek called him just a great person, saying he was raised the right way. Great family, that he's about the right things, that it's about his team. It's about winning, and it's about doing the right thing, being accountable to the whole organization. That kind of internal wiring matters more in a building like this than it would almost anywhere else in the league. Because the thing that broke Russell wasn't a lack of arm talent. It was preparation, discipline, and an inability to handle the isolation that comes with being the guy everyone is watching and nobody can actually help. Mendoza's whole story, the overlooked recruit, the transfer who had to prove himself twice, the son who turned his mother's illness into fuel instead of an excuse, reads like the opposite of that particular failure mode. But reading like the opposite of a failure mode and actually avoiding it under NFL lights are two different things. The scouting concerns about his traits are real and came from people who watched him up close. The franchise's pattern with first-round quarterbacks is real and spans over 60 years. The backlash from a segment of fans who think his whole Heisman case was inflated by a weak schedule is real and loud. None of that disappears because his personal story is compelling. If anything, it means every single throw he makes in his first few starts is going to be measured against all of it at once. The doubts, the ghosts, and the story he's already been asked to live up to before he's taken a single professional snap. That's the situation now. A rookie quarterback with a mentor next to him, a coach calling plays for him, and a city that hasn't seen a franchise quarterback work out in longer than most of that city's residents have been alive. Watching every throw for the first sign that history is about to repeat itself. Whatever happens next, it's going to happen with all of that weight already sitting on the table before the ball is even snapped.